let's go right ahead and talk about this game 5, this final matchup between the Celtics and the Mavericks, the final game of the season, the closeout game, whatever you want to call it. So the Mavericks, they ended up getting blown out of the water again, 106 to 88, and again this Celtics team just showed the Mavericks why they were just the better team all series. This game was never close. From the start of the game all the way to the end of the game, it was never close, similar to every other game in the series. Jaylen Brown, your finals MVP, and also your Eastern Conference finals MVP, ended the game with 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists, but he wasn't the real hero. Jason Tatum, oops, not that guy. Actually, you know what? Yeah, Kyrie is the real hero for the Boston Celtics. Why? Because he was atrocious throughout the entire series. He's your hero, Boston. He ended the game with 15 points, 3 rebounds, and 9 assists, and with a putrid shooting performance in the entirety of the finals, and a putrid shooting performance to close out the series as well. He shot 5 for 16 in this final game, and in almost every single game that he's played, and he ended up taking more shot attempts than points scored. This was a horrible performance from Kyrie Irving, and this finals as a whole has been a horrible performance for Kyrie. Now, obviously, like I accidentally said that he was the reason why the Celtics won, but in reality, it was this man who was the hero of the Boston Celtics, Jason Tatum. He ended the game 31 points, 8 rebounds, and 11 assists, while also shooting, let me see, 11 for 24 from the field. He shot 1 for 7 from 3, but it doesn't matter because he ended the game with 31 and 11. That is a very, very good closeout game, and after being very inconsistent throughout the majority of the series, he was able to show up when they desperately needed him, and there's not really much more that needs to be said about this performance other than, it's about time that he had a good performance like this. And unfortunately for him, this wasn't rewarded. This wasn't rewarded. Like, this performance wasn't enough to give him the finals MVP, despite the fact that this, performance, it really boosted his stats. I'll talk a little bit more about that, in the fourth segment and probably, a little bit of the second segment, but this performance, it was really close, and it made the finals MVP discussion a little bit more competitive, because if you remember throughout a majority of the series, I was saying, that Jaylen Brown was clear cut going to be the finals MVP. It didn't matter. And with I also didn't mention Luka Doncic. Luka, he ended the game with 28 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists. Again, another great performance from Luka, but it was all for nothing because his team and his teammates, they just didn't show up, and they failed to show up when with the game in the balance, like they've done every single game in this entire series. Jalen Josh Green, he ended the game 5 for 8. He was the only other really important piece to the Dallas Mavericks, and it's like this team that's very isolation heavy, and well, not really isolation heavy, but it's very ball dominant, where it's like you need two players on the team to constantly perform. It's not ideal to winning the championship. The Houston Rockets, they tried it before without having much defense, and it failed miserably for them when they went up against a team similar to the Boston Celtics in the Golden State Warriors back in 2018 that had a loaded squad full of players that could provide offenses for you and for your squad. This two-person basketball, it wasn't going to work against this team basketball, because if you remember throughout a majority of the season, I'm just gonna put Jaylen Brown's averages up here since he is the Finals MVP, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few seconds. But if you notice, throughout a majority of the series, it wasn't Jason Tatum's having a great game, or it was always Jaylen Brown was having a great game. Like Jaylen Brown, he always seemed to have a great game in every single win between the other than game 5, he's had a great game in every single one of those wins. In every single one of those 3 games, he's played phenomenally. And but on top of Jaylen Brown playing phenomenally, there was also Kristaps Porzingis that played great in Game 1, Drew Holiday that played great in Game 2, and then Tatum that played great in Game 3. So it was a whole team effort more so than it was just, two players on one team taking all of the shots. And that was the big difference maker and why the Celtics were ultimately able to win. Because while they were running a very similar offensive scheme, they were running a very similar scheme where they had two ball handlers, well, two primary ball handlers. They run a pick and roll. They run a 5-out spacing, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, it's the two main ball handlers, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, doing most of the work. Similar to how with Dallas, it's Kyrie and Luka doing most of the work. The difference between the Celtics and Dallas is that the Celtics, they already have their set, primary ball handlers and their set pieces on the offenses, their number one and their number two option. It's not like the other players on the team can't do more with the ball. That's like the problem that the Dallas Mavericks were sort of experiencing when going up against the Celtics. It's the fact that the Celtics, they had multiple options to run the offense, and they had multiple scoring options at their disposal that they could use. And it's not like if you made sure that Tatum never touched the ball, that wouldn't determine whether or not the Celtics would score or not. The Celtics would most likely still score. Compared to how if it was on Dallas, if you prevent Luka from touching the ball, chances are the Dallas Mavericks aren't going to be able to score. Or if you prevent both Luka and Kyrie from touching the ball, the Mavericks weren't going to score. You can't do that against the Celtics. It's a completely different ball game. And there is someone in the chat. If the Mavs had even one more offensive weapon, even part-time, Dallas wins this series. I think Hardaway Jr. was underutilized. I think you're just dead wrong. Like I understand that, like, yes, if Tim Hardaway was there, the series would have been much more competitive without a doubt. But I think you're just wrong because like that's undermining the Celtics and their defense and just how good of a defensive team they really are. I mean, they weren't able to stop Luka, but they were able to stop Kyrie. And if they're able to stop Kyrie, you really think they're not going to be able to stop Tim Hardaway Jr.? Like, come on. It's no contest. Kyrie, like, you could argue that maybe Kyrie was missing a lot of shots, but at the same time, when have we seen him? I mean, we've seen him play like this bad only against, the Celtics. And while you could make the argument that it's like, well, since he played for the Celtics, they know his game better than anyone. You could also argue that like if you like guarding Kyrie is one of the most difficult players to guard. And the fact that they were able to slow him down just enough like to make him a non-factor and blow out the Celtics in every single game is nothing short of impressive. And I feel like you're undermining that. You can't stop Kyrie, Doncic, and player X at the same time. They just did. They just stopped Kyrie. They stopped Kyrie and they stopped Doncic. Well, they didn't really stop Doncic, but they stopped Kyrie, and that was really the only thing that you needed. Like, obviously, the Mavericks, they weren't going to win without the production from both of them. All you needed to do was slow down one. All you needed to do was slow down one of those options, and the chances of you winning the series were going to be higher than if you were to not stop if you were to just not stop either of them. And most of these wins that the Dallas Mavericks have had throughout all of the postseason has been when Kyrie and Luka perform. So all you have to do is slow one of them down just a little bit, and you win the series. Now, obviously, it's easier said than done. With all due respect to Kyrie, and there's a lot more in the comments. Doncic dominated the postseason, even with double and triple teams. The third shooter opens up the court for him. He shot horribly in this postseason, and I was going to bring it up, and I was going to bring it up just a little bit later in the third segment, but you're almost making me bring it up now. But Luka shot very, very poorly, and it's like they weren't going to do anything. But like, I understand, like, because he does have a lot more in the comments, and Boston has great defense and a deep bench. Exactly, they weren't going to, even if they had a third option playing, that third option, it wasn't going to be enough. It just wasn't. This Celtics team is a you know what? I'll go into the next segment and I'll talk a little bit about that because we are running out of time in this first segment. I'll go ahead and bring up some of the stats, and I might change the order of the segments because now this is actually worth discussing. So I might go ahead and go talk about what's next for Dallas in the second segment as opposed to talking about how this finals was rather boring, because this is actually worth discussing. So I'm gonna answer all of those comments that you have in the comment section right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned.